Today we'll talk a little bit about Donatello's David. We begin in Florence, of course, which is the center of the Italian Renaissance. Donatello for us will serve as our representative of the early Renaissance. His bronze David dating from around the 1440s and commissioned by the great patron family and ruling family of Florence at this time, which is the Medici family. As we study these heroic sculptures, having studied the hero story of Donatello, Michelangelo, and Bernini, we want to consider the fact that we are basically reading a sculpture. We've talked a great deal about how writers depict characters, a good word as it suggests painting, in fact, that's the Latin root there. And we talk about the choices they make to influence the quality of their artistry. Now, in the same way, sculptors make choices as well. And this happens to be the choice that Donatello has made, again, dating from the 1440s and early Renaissance sculpture. Some things that are incredibly significant about this, just in the history of art, is that it's the first freestanding male nude sculpture made since antiquity. And it is, in fact, bold, of course, that it is nude, which was not typical of medieval works or works of the Middle Ages, which is a clear indication that we've moved into a new era of art and a new era of history in general. It's bronze. It happens to be life-sized, and it was likely placed in the Palazzo de' Medici, the Medici family palace. Nowadays, you can see it in the Bargello. Here's a close-up of Donatello's David's face, so you can see that he's not completely nude. Of course, he does have a hat or a helmet of sorts, a sort of hat that was popular during the times. He's got relatively long hair, which is also the fashion in the 1440s in Florence. And he has laurels around his hat too, which suggests victory, even today. And we can get some sort of sense of his face right here. So if we think about the choice that Donatello has made, he's chosen to depict post-climax in terms of the story. So after Goliath has been felled, and we can see an extremely relaxed David. He's got something of an enigmatic, almost a Mona Lisa-like smile on his face. And there's a good amount of pride. You can imagine him wanting to be admired. There's almost a demand for attention in his look. Now, if I can draw your attention to his posture for a moment, you'll see, first of all, that it is a contrapposto view. You can compare this in your mind to the Critias boy. However, it is even more relaxed than that. In fact, his left leg is somewhat raised off the ground, and there's something of an effeminate posture as well, and we'll get into that a little bit more deeply. Notice the bent wrist, relaxing on his hip, and even if we think about his body, there's almost a suggestion of breasts on his chest. It's a thoroughly androgynous figure, and we'll look at the stature from behind in a moment to draw that out in more detail. But it is a young man, of course, so this is a young man who's not reached male maturity yet, and there's a softness and a suppleness to his body. You can see the way, in many ways, that the sculpture is a study in contrasts with the effeminacy of David and his youth, versus the aged and incredibly masculine and bestial Goliath sitting there at his feet. Do note, of course, we can see both weapons in this particular slide, so you can see the massive sword of Goliath. We can't even imagine the idea that David himself could wield such a sword, whereas we see the rock in his hand, which did the murder, of course. And here, looking at the rear view of the sculpture, you can see very clearly what I mean by the androgynous or even effeminate aspects of the sculpture. If I were to show you first this photo on the left, I think most of you may assume from the hair and the shape of the buttocks and the hips, and even the suggestion of breasts, that this is a female figure. In some ways, Donatello was certainly playing a bit with gender here. There's quite a few other kind of playful and strange things that art historians have gone a little bit crazy with over the years. But if you take a look at the right, frame, you can see the wings from Goliath's helmet sort of crawling up the inner thigh of David, as if almost in a teasing sort of way, a provocative sort of tickling way, which is quite odd given the circumstances. This slide here just gives you a little bit better view of the back, and you can certainly see the stone behind David's back a little bit more clearly, and you can see some of the details of Goliath's helmet. And finally, we conclude with a close-up of Goliath's face. You can see the scale of it. First of all, his head is absolutely massive as compared to David's. And then beyond that, it's an incredible study in contrasts. It's highly masculine, obviously, with a full beard. Donatello's David is cleanly shaven, if he even needs to shave at all in the first place. There's again some of these strange provocative elements. You can see Goliath's beard sort of working its way between David's toes. And if you recall the last slide too, you could even see this sort of serpentine aspect to Goliath, as the back of his helmet is scaly and primitive in a way, and that's what he's meant to represent versus the divinely inspired, youthful, perfectly androgynous young man who doesn't even need to be armored to prevail in battle. We have this heavily armored He-Man who ironically gives way to the weakness and suppleness of this young man. You can see the great kind of Bronze Age scene too depicted on the front of David's helmet. So as we work, keep these images in your mind, and you can make some really kind of fascinating and useful comparisons in the way Michelangelo and Bernini will tackle the same subject.